Tracking aim is uniquely interesting in the sense that it appears to be much more difficult to do than it actually is. The average player is far more capable of great tracking than they may have ever realized. It's simply being inhibited by a few barriers that can be overcome throughout this video. And what's important about that observation is that I'm referring to aiming in-game and not in aim trainers. You don't need to be an aim training god like Maddie to have good tracking in Overwatch, Battlefield, Apex, and so on. But you do need to be a Maddie to have great tracking in the hardest tracking scenarios that aim trainers have to offer, which place you in aiming situations that far exceed the difficulty of anything you would ever encounter in-game. There's a key difference there, and what we're focusing on in this video is having good tracking in FPS games with as little time and effort invested as possible. You can always go the extra mile afterwards, but at first you may as well use the biggest and easiest improvements first to give you that solid foundation. And a quick disclaimer, as I mentioned, the point of this video is to improve your tracking as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I'll be condensing all of the most important and actionable information that I can into one package. I want you to be able to finish this video and to know exactly what to implement into your next games to instantly have better tracking. I cannot possibly cover every single thing in one video, so feel free to check out my past videos and stay tuned for future vids that explain some of these concepts in further detail. Okay, firstly, tracking is primarily about being able to move our crosshair at a consistent speed. Can we move it slowly at one speed? Can we move it quickly at one speed? And so on. This falls under the umbrella of smoothness, but it's not exactly the same thing, so I'll avoid that terminology so we can avoid any confusion. So long as your crosshair is over the target, if it's moving at the same speed as the target, then you're perfectly tracking them. The speed that you perceive them to be moving at comes down to your distance to the target, the direction they're moving, whether they're ADSing, crouching, and so on. All of these little variables will change how fast you need to move your crosshair, but the good news is that each encounter will mostly stick to one speed. If you can match that speed, you can track them. For example, with a mouse script that moves at a uniform speed, you can see it tracking this mid-ranged target. But then if we move closer, it's no longer moving quickly enough, and if we move further away, now it's moving too quickly. I can change the speed of the script to suit each situation, and this is essentially what we need to be doing ourselves. We need to quickly determine how fast an enemy is moving and prepare ourselves to track at that particular speed. I should clarify that there can be some deviation in this perceived target speed. For example, if a target is running toward you, you barely have to move at all. But when they go past you, you suddenly have to aim very quickly before hardly needing to move once again. The vast majority of aiming encounters are barely impacted by this deviation in speed, so for the most part we can ignore it. What this means is that you should be approaching each fight with an idea of what hand and mouse movements are going to be needed. If you're about to track someone in the distance, you need to be ready for some very slow and deliberate movements. If a target jumps out in front of you, it's time to use larger movements. This isn't permission to panic and swipe your mouse around, by the way. Larger movements still need to be at a consistent speed and be controlled. Okay, so we know that moving the crosshair at a consistent speed is important, but if you aren't able to move it at a consistent speed, then it won't help you out very much. So let's address any barriers there before moving on. If your crosshair is constantly jumping in front and behind your target, the main culprit is typically mouse sensitivity being too fast. For most modern FPS games, a sensitivity between 25 and 50 centimeters per 360 is generally pretty safe. It will depend on the game you're playing, of course. In TAC shooters like Valorant and Counter-Strike, it looks more like 35 to 80 centimeters. You can use sites like aiming.pro to check what centimeters per 360 you are currently playing on. If you are playing on default settings at something like 5 centimeters per 360, you will never have great aim. It doesn't matter if it feels comfortable to you right now, you are at a massive mechanical disadvantage that is basically impossible to overcome. The next thing you can check or fix is your friction against the mousepad and desk. If you are in a humid environment in particular and your skin sticks and rolls rather than gliding along the surface, you can see this jittery aim as a result. Regularly washing your hands and any skin that contacts the desk with soap and water while playing can help reset this clamminess and provide a better glide for a while. Wearing a sleeve is also a great option, especially to have consistent friction day to day. There are plenty of sleeve options out there that should do the trick if you're having issues. I've tried over 20 sleeves by now, and just had my own custom sleeves designed with Scody, who are a premium sportswear brand here in Australia. You can find them at struthgaminggear.com. I'll talk more about their design and what they do in another video though. What happens if we are tracking with the wrong crosshair speed? Well, the big thing to avoid is overreactive aim. Say we're aiming too fast and move ahead, suddenly you flick back and aim way too slowly and need to flick forward again, and so on. Unless you catastrophically misjudge the speed, you'll only ever need slight adjustments. To make this easier, really think about how your hand is moving at the time. Depending on whether you're too slow or too fast, gently dial up or dial back that hand speed. A small change goes a long way, so keep things gradual and controlled instead of overreactive and exaggerated. The final, quick solution to this jittery aim comes down to reading movement and avoiding constantly triggering your reaction time tax. This is its own topic, so if your jitteriness hasn't been fixed yet, don't stress. The next chapter will cover this bit in more detail. To tie this concept of consistent speed and smoothness together, it's time to dive into the most important skill required for great tracking, which is movement reading. Fortunately, for how important this is, it's also the easiest to implement into your gameplay. No need for hundreds of hours of aim training or anything like this. A simple mental reminder is all it takes for you to use this in your next game. The key here is to acknowledge the goals of the player or NPC you are aiming at and the environment you are in. It's important to remember that there is another person just like you piloting that enemy on your screen, or at least some logic if it's an NPC. This means they will have similar goals and instincts to you that you need to be aware of. I really like this clip from Darktide as an example of reading movement. I know this charging NPC wants to reach me or my team, and to do so they'll have to run up these stairs. This means I know exactly where it's going and can plan out my tracking movements ahead of time. I track it running down and smoothly follow its change in direction up the stairs. If I wasn't reading movement and the constraints of the environment around me, which in this case are the stairs that it needs to climb, then this change in direction would come as a surprise to me, and I would have to wait 200-ish milliseconds for my reaction time to catch up before adjusting back to the enemy. In this example, I start shooting at this bloodhound. Within the first few shots, it becomes clear that they aren't willing to take this bad fight as they don't look my way. So it becomes clear that this player's current goal is to get to the nearest cover over here. This means I can plan ahead a simple one-directional track and land some easy shots. And here, this enemy in front of me jumps and we can see their knee shoot out to our left, so we know they're going to be falling in a predictable arc down here. And similarly to our Darktide example, this player is running up the stairs to reach the roof, so we can plan our tracking ahead of time to follow the path they will most likely take. Knowing where an enemy is moving makes tracking significantly easier to do. I think a problem many players run into with tracking and aiming in general is overestimating the evasiveness and randomness of enemies on their screen. They treat these enemies as if they can move in impossible ways and have overreactive, jittery, and chaotic looking aim as a result. Their brain is constantly paying the reaction time tax and playing catch up to every little movement and action. It's a weird way to think about it, but you can essentially consider that everything you are seeing in-game is 200-ish milliseconds in the past. When you're playing FPS games that inherently require precise inputs, this delay can be very punishing if you're in a constant cycle of reacting to what's happening on screen. This is why predicting movement and planning aiming movements in advance is so important. With the correct read, you can circumvent the reaction time tax, plan aiming movements that may span seconds rather than milliseconds, and ultimately aim at your enemies in real time. To hammer this point home, I have two examples from aim training that reflect this principle very clearly. First, in a Kovacs scenario like Smoothness Training 60, the target follows a predetermined path. Knowing exactly where the target is moving means you can predict and lock in your mouse movements for very easy tracking and even have perfect accuracy through the changes in direction. But if I jump into mid-range strafe's invincible, I can still track it during the strafe, but every change in direction incurs a reaction time tax that I cannot avoid. The strafe intervals are random, so I can't reliably predict them. Even though both examples have easy to track targets that change directions, the one with predictable movement is much easier to aim at than the one with random movement. And the second example is with scenarios like 1 wall 6 targets TE. To score highly in these scenarios, you need to employ a skill called routing, which is essentially planning your path and subsequently your mouse movements ahead of time. When played poorly, the player is often in a cycle of reacting after every shot. You hit a target, choose the next target, shoot it, choose the next target, shoot it, and so on. But each time you choose a new target, you're incurring that reaction time tax. Whereas if you plan your shots ahead of time, you can instantly move on, saving 200-ish milliseconds in reaction time, and even more by optimizing mouse movements instead of constantly stopping and starting. There is more to routing than that for scoring purposes, but for the principle of movement reading and the importance of planning mouse movements ahead of time, this was the important part to cover. Okay, so how do you actually read movement? Almost all of this skill comes immediately from focusing on your target, not just looking at it. There is a big difference. I have a video all about it linked below if you are unfamiliar with it. The quick version is that you can look at this fan and the blades spin around in a blur, but if you focus on a single blade, it comes into focus and you can track it spinning around. That shift in perspective is the difference between looking and focusing. By focusing on your target, you absorb their visual cues, how fast they're moving, what direction they're moving, where they're looking, their leg just pointed in a different direction, so they're changing direction, and so on. The rest of the skill comes down to game sense and consideration of the surrounding environment and enemy goals. If you shoot an enemy that's in the open, they're likely going to beeline for the nearest cover, so you can plan your aiming movements accordingly. If you're fighting an enemy in a tight corridor and they're AD strafing, you know they can't strafe further than the wall, so you can predictively track them accordingly. If an enemy jumps, you know they're mostly locked into a certain trajectory. If they jump off a building or use a zipline, jump pad, and so on, the same applies. You can almost imagine this predictive line forming whenever you see an enemy, and all you need to do is paint over it with your mouse. This can be trickier to learn as it's more of a conceptual understanding and doesn't always follow strict rules. But I honestly think the majority of players are much better at this than they would think. They simply need to remember to consider it. For me, when I'm about to track someone, I quickly assess their distance and speed, acknowledge the environment and how it may influence the fight, and prepare the right mouse movements. This doesn't require you to stop and literally think these steps through before shooting. It's simpler than it appears, so try not to overthink it. The enemy distance is automatic to interpret. We instinctively know if something is far away or not. It doesn't require effort to think about. The speed is simple too. Are they running, walking, crouching? Environment can be a little trickier but still very manageable. All you're really looking for is what cover is around them. That can be a rock in a field or the walls inside a building. The trick is to acknowledge these variables and plan accordingly, rather than autopiloting. The better you get at aiming and playing FPS games in general, the more automatic this becomes. Movement is a massive topic, so I'll just cover the essentials for tracking. Our own movement is almost like having another mouse plugged in that we're aiming with. It's another way for us to move our crosshair around. We just have to make sure it's helping us to aim and not throwing us off. If you have played on a fast sensitivity before, you may have noticed that you often use your movement to make small crosshair adjustments rather than the mouse. This doesn't really mean anything, it just goes to show that you essentially have two different inputs that control your crosshair. For tracking, we can think of it as a sensitivity multiplier. Using the same script from before, aiming to the right ends up here. Yet if we move to the right at the same time, we end up further out. And if we move to the left, we fall much shorter. This shows us that moving while aiming can dampen or amplify our mouse inputs. This can be quite jarring if we change directions while tracking something. A simple rule to follow in-game that works in almost any situation is to combine your changes in movement direction with changes to your crosshair speed and/or direction. This falls under something called anti-mirror strafing, where if your opponent is moving left, you move to the right and vice versa. It doesn't need to be that structured though, so don't focus on trying to mirror them perfectly. Because you are moving your crosshair in the opposite direction to your movement, you need to aim more. This isn't a bad thing, just something to keep in mind. Modern games like Apex Legends and the Finals use a mechanic called recoil smoothing, where if your crosshair is moving faster than a certain threshold, your recoil is greatly reduced. Anti-mirror strafing helps to engage this mechanic more often, which is another good reason for using it. Although I would like to emphasize that you don't need to restrict your movements to only copy the enemy. The important part to take away from this is to associate your changes in movement with changes to your crosshair behavior. The alternative to this is mirror strafing, where by copying an enemy's movement, you don't have to aim at all. This technique makes aiming very easy, as you barely need to move your mouse at all, if any. The problem is that it can be difficult to properly sync up, especially if the target is facing and fighting you. It's still worth looking out for moments that you can use this, as it's essentially free tracking. This clip ties in all three concepts of acknowledging movement's impact on crosshair speed, mirror strafing, and anti-mirror strafing, while also showing off some movement reading and assessing the environment around me. I see this enemy running to my right and they're not looking at me. This means I can mirror strafe for free shots and barely have to move my crosshair at all. Mirror strafing here also means I can move off this bridge that's out in the open and move closer to cover. I have to make a very slight crosshair adjustment because I'm slowed down by ADSing, but it's hardly noticeable. This bloodhound starts shooting at me, so I can no longer hold my current strafe without getting beamed. I strafe the other way to avoid their shots, but notice how my crosshair speed stays the exact same. It should have slowed down when I changed direction, but because I associate movement changes with changes to crosshair speed, when I hit A on my keyboard to move the other way, I knew that was the time to move my mouse slightly faster to compensate. I switch over to the Bloodhound and start anti-mirror strafing, so I am moving to the right and aiming to the left. Notice how I'm now playing from cover, which is a result of all the movement used so far to both help me aim and to position myself more safely than standing out on that bridge. So to sum up our movement, we can think of it as having a second mouse plugged in. If we don't respect that, then it becomes a conflicting input that can throw us off. But if we acknowledge that it's there and know what impact it has on our aim, we can use it to our advantage. Aiming at targets that quickly change direction, known as AD strafing, is the hardest part of tracking, but it's nothing we can't overcome. This is a big topic that deserves its own video, so once again I'll just cover the main points. On the surface, AD strafing can seem impossibly fast and unpredictable to aim at, but in reality it is far more standardized than you may realize. The main problem to avoid is succumbing to that reaction time tax, where you're in this constant cycle of reacting to their change in direction, flicking back to them, then they change direction again, and your reaction time catches up, you flick back, and so on, resulting in an aiming pattern that looks like you're just flicking back and forth and not actually tracking them. What we're mainly looking for instead is to have a smoother transition between directions. You will likely still need a little flick to get back to target, but you want to ensure you are actively tracking in between. Your mouse should feel like it's constantly in movement rather than stopping and starting. If you have Kovacs, you can drill this in some scenarios I whipped up a while back. These were never published, they're not tuned for scoring or anything like that. I made them purely to work on having smoother AD tracking. I have just uploaded them as they're now relevant for this video, so I'll link to the playlist in the description. When it comes to AD strafing in-game, it is far less random than it may seem. Intentionally randomizing your AD strafe is actually quite difficult to do, particularly in the chaos of a fight. You can try it yourself right now. Try to alternate hitting A and D in a weird random sequence. And remember, if you move between them too fast, you will look like you're standing still in game. So you still need to try and hold at least some of the presses to have a usable AD strafe. Because of this, almost everyone you encounter in game will alternate in a reliable pattern, and probably in a very similar cadence to your own strafing, so you can use your own pattern as a reference. So this leaves us with the choice between reacting to AD strafing, where we wait for visual confirmation that they have changed direction and do our best to quickly flick back to them and transition into a smooth track, or predicting when they will change direction and smoothly changing our crosshair direction before we have visual confirmation. Generally speaking, reactive aim is safer and more consistent, so it's a good option when you are ahead in a fight and can accept a few missed shots when they change direction. Overall, predicting their strafes has the highest potential damage output, but you are at risk of throwing off your own aim if they don't strafe within that window of time. In my opinion, predicting is the superior option and is a skill well worth learning. But in the big picture, you'll want to be utilizing both depending on the situation. To accurately predict and to know when to predict, we have to consider the context and environment. In this example, I catch this Wattson jumping off, and by the time she lands, I've already landed a lot of damage. This means that player is very likely thinking they need to stop taking damage ASAP, so there's almost no chance this player would keep moving to my left, which is the same direction they've been taking damage in, so I can start moving my crosshair to the right well before my reaction time can acknowledge they changed direction. And on the flip side of this, here I am at very low health trying to heal, and I see someone shoot past me, so I know I have to commit to a heavily disadvantaged fight. If I have any chance of winning this, I need to land every shot that I can, so predicting is the only way I can come up with enough damage to turn the tide. Sure, they should have killed me, and if I played purely reactively, they almost certainly would have had enough time to land that final hit. To sum up tracking AD strafing targets, you can think of it like you're aiming at yourself. Just imagine that player in front of you is actually you, and not some unpredictable random being. In their situation, what would you do? Most of the time in this context, that will mean AD strafing at a regular cadence to avoid damage, because being intentionally random is difficult, and preferring to move to ward cover, especially if you're taking damage. And finally, let's quickly cover the concept of minimizing your mouse movements. Once again, this topic deserves its own video, so I'll condense it down into juicy, actionable pieces. Your targets are bound by the rules and mechanics of that game. They aren't going to zip around your screen randomly, so your crosshair and mouse also should not be zipping around all over the place. If you're the type of player who panics during fights and whips their crosshair around, this can make a huge difference for you. The concept is very simple, and it all comes down to aiming less. Whether a target is far away or right in your face, moving your crosshair around less will almost always be the right play. You will be astonished at how many more one clips and big chunks of damage you can get simply from not aiming once you're already on target. You may have noticed this yourself too if you have ever suddenly switched to playing on very low sensitivity. Your aim in general might suck or feel restricted, but you may notice these random one clips that occur, primarily because if your crosshair is on target, it's hard to move it away from it. To get in the zone and reduce wasted crosshair movement, something I like to do is focus on my crosshair placement, ensuring it's at chest or head height, pointed toward where enemies are most likely to be, and also moving it around smoothly rather than flicking to different points of interest. This isn't necessarily better, but it gets you in the right mindset of smoothly aiming and slowing things down. During a fight, you will still want to flick to a target if it's necessary. This is more about navigating the environment and priming yourself for controlled aim once a fight starts. Another helpful way to think of it would be like trying to replicate what controller aim looks like. The speed limits of an analog stick and the stickiness of aim assist results in slow, deliberate, and efficient looking aim. Okay, so we've covered a lot of information so far. To help summarize things, I've added chapters to this video so you can easily jump around to each topic as needed. Now, let's quickly recap. Consistent speed. If you can move your crosshair at the same speed as your target, you can track them. The perceived speed of the target will change depending on their distance to you and what they're doing, so quickly assess the situation and prepare the right mouse movements. Movement reading. Focus on your target, don't just look at them. Absorb their visual cues and think about the enemy's goals and motivations. Create these predictive paths in your mind that you'll paint over with your crosshair. Movement. Your own movement is like having a second mouse plugged in, so be aware of how it will affect your aim. Remember to sync up changes in movement with changes in your mouse movement. AD strafing. AD strafing is very predictable and consistent. When you know the enemy wants to or needs to start AD strafing, you can start tracking back and forth with smooth transitions at a regular cadence. Minimizing mouse movement. Try to reduce wasted mouse movements and overreactive aiming. Slow things down and play more smoothly. Mimicking controller aim can be a handy cue to use. Tracking is a skill that draws from just about every possible discipline, skill, technique, and so on within aiming. Despite this, I would argue that good tracking in FPS games requires very little mouse control and physical ability. The skill really comes down to these auxiliary concepts like movement reading and settings. Tracking weapons in general are typically quite forgiving too. You have large magazines, and whether you hit the edge of a target or the center doesn't really matter. If you're aiming in the center and hit them right on the edge, who cares? You technically missed your target, but you still get a hit anyway. I'm not trying to downplay the skill cap of tracking. The skill cap is absurdly high. It's just that that level of mastery isn't really needed to track well in any popular FPS games. Anecdotally, I would consider myself to be a flick shot specialist, and while I've not pushed for aim training scores in many years, I've always been significantly better at clicking scenarios than tracking. Yet, in-game, my tracking has always been just as good, if not better, and it all comes down to those other skills like movement reading. By applying them, you can make tracking so much easier on yourself. You can go a long way with tracking in-game without needing insane mouse control. You can check out the Clawmate mouse mod I designed over at StruthGamingGear.com, video all about how it works right here. Thanks so much for watching, be sure to subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch you in the next one.